welcome back to another Mental Health Mini. Today, I really am delighted to be joined by my local MP, Jess Phillips. Jess, welcome.
Oh.
So, as always with these, we try and get people's understanding of what their mental health experience is to show you that you're not alone and that at least one person out there potentially is feeling like you are, and offer any advice that you may not have heard yet. So, Jess, as I always say with these, I'm going to put you on the spot. Tell us about your experiences.
Okay, well, my experiences are really long and vast, both within my family and also personally. So my grandfather who lived with me when I was a child, he was from Yardley. He was bipolar. And so in my childhood, we were sort of educated and learnt to deal with somebody who was going through varying different stages, whether that was depressive or manic in those cases. And so as a child, I experienced what it was like to deal with people who had suicide ideation, and to try and help somebody who believed that you'd be better off without them. And so, I dealt with that quite a lot in my youth. My brother, as well, was for very, very many years had very, very poor mental health, suffered from psychosis, but drug-induced psychosis, and suffers from substance misuse issues. And now works at Birmingham University in the psychology department, creating recovery programs for people with drug-related substance misuse issues and the psychosis and mental health problems that come from that, and how best to deal with them. Personally, I have had periods of suffering from anxiety that had to be clinically managed. So I've taken medication. I've undergone other sorts of, sort of talking therapies, I suppose that's what we call them, for periods of anxiety where it doesn't matter what the rationale is and all of the evidence tells me. I'm somebody who's so obsessed with looking at evidence to make policy, and yet all of the evidence that will be laid out to me that everybody is going to crash down by the morning. It's always in the night time. So I have since I was a teenager suffered from quite severe insomnia at points in my life, and I remember my mum telling me that it's amazing how the thing at 2 o'clock in the morning that feels like it's never going to get better, by 9 o'clock in the morning, when you're putting the kids' shoes on, you've forgotten it. And I have to try and remind myself to be the person at 9 o'clock, 2 o'clock at night. I think, be the person at 9 o'clock in the morning, be the person at 9 o'clock. Why can't you get to the 9 o'clock stage quicker? But yeah, I have a job that is quite anxiety inducing. I'm both under threat quite a lot of the time, actual real life threat and abuse. And so you have to learn coping strategies to deal with that sort of thing so that it doesn't. And if you are at a low ebb, I always think of it as being like a bucket. If it has lots of holes in it, I can't cope with the things that are difficult in my life, because there might be 5 things that are happening, like something to do with your kids. Like my son got his GCSE results today. So, last night I was like rolling around in bed like a lunatic, oh God, I just couldn't sleep. And so if that comes on top of being worried about money, or being worried about something to do with an election, or a case that's stuck in my head from my constituency, the case that I think I haven't done enough, I've got to do this tomorrow, the bucket will empty very quickly and your anxiety can come on very fast. But when things are good, the difficult things about my job, you can just cope with them, and you have to try and remember that you're not superhuman in those circumstances, and that when things are hard, sometimes they are hard.
I think, yeah, absolutely. Obviously, you've seen this from several different angles. You've had family issues. You've got a job that's quite high pressure and stress. Being a parent, I'm not one, I can only assume, but obviously honestly,
it's the most stressful thing in the whole bloody world.
You are known for putting yourself out there, and obviously you're very vocal about some of your personal struggles you've been through and how that's affected you. On a day-to-day basis, what are the things that seem to what are the things that stress you out? Obviously you talk about your anxiety.
Lord
What are the more common things for you?
I mean, actually, somebody who worked for many years with vulnerable people working in women's refuges, there was a much better system in proper services of what we would call sort of clinical supervision. So when you're taking on quite a lot of people's problems, I used to go through a process with my co-workers or with a professional like clinical supervisor to get rid of some of that. So I was dealing with rape and violence and abuse and exploitation. And so that I didn't take that home, I would have a process that would happen. Obviously, as a member of parliament, there is no similar process. And so obviously I have a team of staff who I work with, and we try and make sure that we talk about the cases that are difficult together to do some of that. But one of the most stressful things in my life is that, you know, people will ring me and be like, well, I'm going to be homeless by the end of the day. And you have to then try and you will feel, even if it's nothing, it's not my fault, it's never my fault that these things are happening, but you feel a level of responsibility that you can't put down this sort of crystal duck that you've now got in your hands, and if you put it down it might smash. And I've had cases where people have had terrible enduring mental health problems, and you've tried to help them and you've failed, and they have ended up dying by suicide, for example. And that is, those cases live with you, or that they've been murdered in cases of domestic abuse. And so you're holding this crystal duck, and it is very, very stressful if you can't get the thing to happen, and you will feel responsible. I know I'm not responsible, and I know I can tell myself I did everything that I could, but that doesn't mean that human being's life inside my head and in my heart goes away. It doesn't mean I don't feel responsible. I just do. And you always will think, I could have done more, I should have done this. And I see that a lot with people who have suffered a terrible incident of trauma, and then will spend years, sometimes decades, thinking over and over and over again, what if I'd picked up the phone at this stage? What if I'd done this? What if I'd done that? And that is terribly stressful for people, and it's like a cloud that you can't get rid of. So that I find very stressful. My job is stressful, just generally, because it happens as it's happening. It's not like this week we're going to be working on this project. It's like this week there's an enormous fire in a part of your constituency, which happens in my constituency more than I would like. And suddenly you'll be on holiday and it's like, sorry, you've got to come home. There's this thing, all the jobs have been lost from a big provider in your constituency, or that a war is breaking out in a different part of the world. Somebody's been murdered, and immediately everything else has to stop, and you have to just focus on what is usually traumatic incidences for people. And so that is very, very difficult and stressful. People threatening me, people abusing me online, having to deal with a constant noise of social media, emails, phones, like that is quite stressful. Of course, I wonder I'm still standing with all this bloody stress. My children can be stressful when their lives are difficult. Going through the pandemic with kids in the house and having to watch them struggle with certain things has been very, very, very stressful. Obviously, like everybody else, I stress about things like my mortgage and my livelihood and my job. And of course, my job is not like other people's jobs, is that every couple of years I have to stand in front of 128,000 people and say, please let me keep my job. And that is quite stressful as well. And also I employ 6 people, and keeping their livelihood, keeping them going is a stress for me as well, like making sure they're provided for is quite stressful. So quite a lot of stress in my life.
So on the flip side of that, then obviously you've talked about a lot of the negative, for want of a better word, parts. What do you use as coping mechanisms? How do you keep going? How do you keep yourself from falling apart?
Yeah, I mean, I've had to learn them, and I think that I wish that I could say that some things come naturally, but I think everybody has to learn coping strategies, and you have to learn them, and you have to literally do it like homework. And it doesn't necessarily have to be onerous. So one of the things I do is every Friday, and this comes from when my children were still needed me to walk them to school. They're old now. They don't want me walking anywhere near them in the streets. But that when I would walk them to school, and on a Friday morning, and then I would go and have a cup of coffee with 5 of my friends whose kids went to school with my kids. And I would just sit for an hour in the morning and just laugh, and in the middle of the work. So it's like on a Friday, so that's in the middle of my working week, really, because I have 2 jobs, one in Birmingham, one in London. I would take this time, and I would always make sure that I had it so that I could feel normal. Sorry about the noise in the background. It is somebody calling my office for help. So that's what you can hear going on in the background.
Perfect.
So I make sure that I make time. I also, apart from Remembrance Sunday, I try not to do any work on a Sunday until my children are in bed. And then I will look at my emails, but I try not to do anything. I try to clear and that means that on Saturday night, I sleep well. Like I get 1 good night's sleep, because I think, well, tomorrow I've got nothing. And I do the Sunday thing for the Saturday night, really. That's what I do. But also I just talk. I've had to learn to talk about things and ask the people around you. So my husband is a lovely, brilliant man, great man. But unless I say, I'm feeling really stressed about this, he won't notice, and that will compound my feelings of isolation. But unless I literally verbalize very, very clearly, I feel stressed today, I'm feeling anxious because, and I feel like this, I'm worried about this, then he can say to me, don't be daft, Bab, here's, and if it does come to that, this is why it'll be okay. This, if the worst comes to the worst, we'll sell the house, we'll go and live in it, we'll live in a 2 up 2 down like we used to, don't worry about it. But I need a sounding board for that from both my friends and my husband. But also in the lockdown, the thing that I found that was really, really helpful is to put in earphones and go for a walk or a run and just stop and take time. With my colleagues in Westminster, a thing I found really hard about the lockdown is the stresses of my job. They are the people who understand it, because they also have it, and I wasn't seeing them. And so I think that plugging back into other people with similar experiences, so essentially peer support, but we don't feel like a peer support group of members of parliament, because that's too lofty. It's essentially like an AA meeting where you all sit around together and have dinner and be like, oh, and this, and I'm having this trouble with my staff, or I'm having this trouble with it, I don't know how to get through this issue, and I share it amongst people who understand. And I think that mental health, but the best mental health service provision I've ever seen is that leans on peer support groups led by specialists.
I think you've touched on something that is slightly different to what I've heard from a lot of people, and myself included. So we've mentioned in these videos about, and I've said it about my wife, if there's something wrong, she can immediately spot it. But actually, that isn't always the case. And sometimes you do need to say, and it's not a criticism of the other person. Sometimes you do need to say, look, I've got something.
No criticism. No, absolutely. So your wife is obviously a good woman. My husband will notice there might be something wrong with me, but the way it manifests. Also, there is a reality about being a woman, and I'm much more likely to feel anxiety at certain times of the month. That's the reality of it. That is just simply the reality. It's a biological thing I cannot control, and I'll be like, why am I crying all the time? And then my husband's like, maybe you're going to get your period. I'm like that. Oh yeah. That's the reason I'm crying, not because there's something else terrible going on. But I think being open and honest about these things and talking about them is the way that we will get around them. But yeah, like my husband is great, but he's not trained in any way like I am about these things. And in personal relationships, I always found it very, very difficult dealing with my brother's mental health problems in a way that I didn't feel with the very vulnerable people I was working with, because you're close to them, and so learning a language that isn't alarmist to say that you're not feeling great, and you could just, and I don't want professional help from him, I just want him to do that thing where he says, doesn't matter, whatever. I remember him once saying to me, we were sat on the sofa with my kids and him all on one sofa, and he just said, at the end of the day, that all you need in life is what's sitting on this it's in this tiny space in the world, and that's all that you need, and everything else is just a bonus. And he'll say things like that I wouldn't say necessarily to a woman in refuge in crisis, but that it takes him 2 minutes to make me feel better.
And it's sometimes that's all it is. It can be a word, it can be a sentence, and suddenly it can lift you. Obviously, I've always wanted to keep this short to keep engagement. Obviously, you're very busy. So I've got one more question for anyone listening, whether they are going through it themselves or they think they know someone going through it. Have you got any advice for them on mental well-being?
I mean, I think that if you're worried about somebody else going through it, that it is about learning a language that isn't, like I say, alarmist, to ask those questions. So if there is an issue of domestic abuse and I suspect it in one of my constituents, I don't say, is your husband battering you? I don't say it like that.
No.
I just, the way to start a conversation is, and always try, don't think it's none of my business or I don't know how to approach this, because you don't have to approach it in a difficult way. All I do is I say, is everything all right at home? It's literally as simple as that. Like, are you all right? Literally just very, 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 very basic. And that's, and you'd be surprised. I have women telling me that they've been raped in the local Tesco's, like, because, you know, if you make yourself available for people to tell you things, it doesn't need to be lots of training, lots of pressure, you don't have to know a lot to just listen to a person. Don't worry that they're going to tell you something you won't know what to do with, because actually we're quite a resourceful, you know, as a you know, a human race, we are quite a resourceful people, and you can probably find it out. But don't panic about asking if somebody's all right because you're not sure what you'll do if they say no, because actually the act of just listening and asking the question is already, you've done 90% of the bar. You've spooled up to 90% by just giving a shit about them. Essentially, that's the reality. That is great medicine. Just being bothered to ask is great medicine. And all I would say is, yeah, practice the thing that, and there isn't a book that can tell you the thing that will de-stress you or make you not feel anxious. But you have to find what those things are, and then you have to practice them, and you have to make time for them. Like, write them into your diary, because otherwise they just won't happen, because life happens. And so I have it written into my diary, nothing in my diary before this time on a Friday, because if I don't do it, things start to build up on top of me, and so you have to practice. But there is no quick win, unfortunately. And don't turn a bad day into a bad week. Don't just think, well, this is, and that's the same when you're dieting. Like, I'm eating a cake on Monday, that means I'm just going to eat McDonald's every dinner for every meal. Like, don't do that. Don't be defeatist. Like, if you have a bad day, just have a bad day. That's okay to have a bad day. I have bad days all the time. But don't promise yourself on a bad day that tomorrow will be bad as well. Just wait and see.
Well, I think that there's lots of things to take away from that, and thank you so much for doing this for us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So, as I say, if anyone in Yardley needs anything, obviously Jess and her team are always around.
Yeah.
From our point of view, anyone online, you can message us at Canaries Trust or myself, David Whiteside, and I'll either help you or point you in the right direction if I can't. So, as I say, Jess, once final time, thank you so much for doing this. It means the world to me. And good luck.
Well done. Well done for doing it. Good stuff.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.